You have now arrived at your destination.
Harley, I'm so excited for this. I cannot believe it's been 5 years since our last episode, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's such an honor and pleasure to be here, Harry. 5 years ago, I can't even. I re-listened to our episode from 5 years back, and in some ways everything has changed, and in some ways a lot of things are still the same. But I just want to say, on behalf of an early guest and an active listener, what you've built here with the podcast is nothing short of amazing. I think that all of us, number one, are we love the show, but we're so proud to see how you've built this show over the years, and you are a testament to perseverance and how just doing the work day after day with sort of this relentless pursuit has built one of the best podcasts in the world. It's amazing.
Man, I so appreciate that. The funny thing for me is you seem to have got younger as I've drastically got older in those 5 years. I do want to start, though, for those that maybe missed the show 5 years ago when I was a terrible interviewer, with a little bit on the context. How did you and Tobi come together, and how did you come to be president of Shopify as you are today?
Yeah. So I've been an entrepreneur for most of my life. My sort of first foray into entrepreneurship happened when I was a kid. I was 13 years old. I'm Jewish, and when you're 13 years old and you're Jewish, you end up going to a lot of bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. And I thought the coolest people in the world, having seen that experience, were the DJs who were effectively, using their minds and using their voice and using their music selection, was effectively able to change the energy of a crowd. 1 minute, you have 300 people sitting down eating like some rubber chicken dinner at some, hall. And then a minute later, everyone's doing the conga line. And I just thought, what an amazing magic trick. And so I became incredibly enthralled with this idea of DJing. And so I called around a bunch of DJ companies, and of course, I asked if they would hire me, and they said no. I had no DJ experience. I looked at I was a 8-year-old kid, even at 13 years old. So I asked my dad what I should do, and he sort of, lightly suggested, why don't I start my own DJ company? And the light bulb went off that, hey, this thing called entrepreneurship is not just fun, but it's also a great way to solve problems. The problem at that point was I wanted to be a DJ. But my real entrepreneurial career happened. We moved from Canada to South Florida, and then I moved back to Canada to go to McGill University in 2001. I was 17, and my family lost everything. My dad was no longer around. And so once again, I sort of pulled out this tool called entrepreneurship out of my tool belt and started selling t-shirts to local universities in Montreal and then the rest of Canada. A mentor of mine, by the end of my undergrad, had convinced me that my t-shirt business was, it was cute and it allowed me to pay the bills and support my mom and sisters, but it was not a real business. It had no competitive advantage. It had no moat around the business. And so that mentor convinced me to consider law school, not to become a lawyer, but to become a better entrepreneur. And that mentor happened to be teaching law in 2005. He took a year off from his practice of law. He was a lawyer, to teach law at the University of Ottawa. And so he said, why don't you apply to the University of Ottawa? And so I did. I applied to one school and luckily got in, moved to Ottawa in 2005, and had no friends, had no family in Ottawa. I'd never been to Ottawa in my life. It's the capital of Canada, but I just had never been here. And so I immediately asked what I always did when I was looking to make friends, where are the entrepreneurs? And I was directed to a coffee shop, and I met a bunch of really amazing entrepreneurs. And one of those entrepreneurs was Tobi. And Tobi was this is 2005 or so. So Tobi was just transitioning from selling snowboards on the internet. He had moved to Canada from Germany and needed to make money, couldn't get a job because he was a new immigrant. So he started a business selling snowboards on the internet, frustrated with the lack of great software to sell something online, built this piece of software and sold the snowboards. And by 2005, it became clear to him that the software behind the snowboard business was more valuable than the snowboard business itself. And so he launched Shopify. And in that sort of first meeting, I told him that I was new to Ottawa. I had this wholesale t-shirt business that I wanted to move online, and I was intrigued by Shopify. And so I became one of the first merchants to use Shopify. And I built an online t-shirt shop. And basically all throughout, I was doing a joint law MBA. So all throughout law school and business school, I studied, but I looked at law school more as a selfish pursuit of acquiring new skills. How can I be a better writer? How can I be a better reader? How can I be more articulate? How can I be a better critical reasoner and debater and all those sort of things? So law school for me was really more like finishing school for entrepreneurship. But I also ran this business all along the way. And then in 2009, I finished school and I was practicing law in Toronto, and I was hating law. And I called Tobi, and I sort of begged him to let me come and join him and a very small handful of other people, mostly engineers, and join him on this journey to get Shopify out to the world and help more people become entrepreneurs. And that was about 13 years ago.
Man, I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned kind of my work ethic before. I have the work ethic because my grandparents lost everything when I was very young, and I saw them lose everything, and I promised myself I'd never let my family be in that position again. That's why I work my fucking ass off. You mentioned they're losing everything. I hope it's okay for me to ask, how did you deal with that, one? And then two, how did it impact you, do you think? Like, for me, it made me just unwaveringly and unhealthily obsessive about winning.
If you just look at COVID, for example, it was a great example. It was a great opportunity to see this in real time. COVID hits pretty much the whole world February, March, April 2020. And you pretty much saw one of two reactions from people, from businesses, from corporations, from associations. Just generally, there were two ways that people reacted. One way was the sense of resistance, that this is bad, I can't wait to go back to the old way. And there was this other group of people that were incredibly resilient, that basically, they saw this tidal wave and they took their surfboard and surfed. And they saw some opportunity in what was, frankly, a global devastation. And I think that's kind of how most people deal with real big setbacks. They either go to the couch and put their blanket over their head, or they get up and they try to figure it out. And the reason I've committed my entire life, both professionally with Shopify, but also personally to entrepreneurship, is because I think entrepreneurship is this incredible tool to dealing with incredible setback. If you lose your job, you can use entrepreneurship to supplement your income. If your dad goes away and your mom and sisters have no money, you can use entrepreneurship to make money concurrently while you're in school. By the way, entrepreneurship is not easy. It's not to say that everyone will be successful at it, but different people have different versions of success. And so my version of success when I was 17 and sort of the world ended for my family was survival. And I think, my grandfather was a Hungarian immigrant, Holocaust survivor, comes to Canada in 1956. Gets to Canada because Canada had let in 40,000 Hungarians during the revolution in Hungary. His job wasn't necessarily, to find his craft or to find his life's work. It was to survive. And the way he did it was he sold eggs at a farmer's market for, 60 years of his life. And I think those are the types of people, those sort of resilient people that see devastation and try to find opportunity or try to make the best of it any way they can. Those are the people I think ultimately that I admire the most, that build the most character. And so that's kind of how, I sort of deal with, even today in our business. Shopify is an incredible business and great company. And, 2 million entrepreneurs have been served by Shopify, and hopefully many millions more. But on a day-to-day basis, there are setbacks, there are issues that happen. And I think the way that I try to deal with those issues is to say, okay, what can we learn from this setback? What are the opportunities that are now available that weren't? And COVID, just going full circle, was a great example of that, because there were so many businesses that had yet, let's just say physical retail stores, that were not digitalizing fast enough, or just didn't digitalize because they didn't feel they had to. And then you had this sort of mass catalyst of digitalization that was required of them because physical stores were closed. And on the other side of it, you have these businesses today that I think are better businesses, more resilient businesses, in many cases, more profitable businesses than ever before. And it's because that trauma, in this case, COVID, caused this incredible change to happen.
You applied it back to the business there. I spoke to quite a few of our mutual friends before the show, and it was actually Amish at first, Mark, who mentioned your empathy being almost unlike any other that he works with in terms of the operators and how you apply it to the business. I wanted to ask, how do you think about what truly great listening means to your team? And how do you think about creating that safety and that safe space where they can come to you with any of their problems and be much more open and candid than one probably used to be with a boss?
Yeah. Wow, it's very kind of Amish to say that. Amish has been a huge part of the Shopify stories. He was in our Series A. First Mark was in our Series A back in 2010. It was a 7 million Series A, I think, on a $25 million post valuation. So, we've come a long way.
It's a pre-seed today. Pre-seed.
Yeah, it is crazy. I think for a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of leaders, there is this desire to go really, really fast. And there's sort of this hyper, efficiency drive that like, we're not going to have a conversation. If the conversation should take 10 minutes, we're not going to take 20 minutes. It's going to be a 10-minute conversation because I got to go do something else. I got to go to the next item on my to-do list. And one of the things that I felt that I was bad at in the early days was I would just, that's how I ran my day to day. Don't get in my way because I'm a bull in a china shop and I need to get shit done. In fact, it's one of the cultural values of Shopify is get shit done. It only sort of dawned on me through coaching and frankly some really well needed personal growth that I'm actually not as efficient as I thought I could be, because even though I thought the 10-minute meeting was sufficient to provide the roadmap to where we need to go to our desired destination, no one actually really understood what I meant, and they were sort of just nodding because my reputation or my brand inside the company was Harley's going to speak very quickly and you need to listen and you need to go. And over time, it became obvious that I wasn't actually being very efficient. In fact, I was being the opposite of efficient because I had to have a second meeting afterwards to re-explain in a different way to the team what actually I was talking about. And so I began to use new, devices or new techniques and say at the end of the meeting, hey, like now is the time. If anyone doesn't understand what I mean, like now is the time to say something. And if you don't want to say it right now in front of the whole group, send me a Slack note immediately after and say, hey, I'd like to just get I'd like to do another summary. And what I started doing was, one, I would record the initial meeting, and then I would record all subsequent meetings should they need additional explanation. And it turned out that as I began to do that more often, yes, the meeting length may have expanded slightly, but in terms of productivity, it also expanded. And I think for a lot of us, there's this kind of, survival, going back to survival again, with early stage businesses where you need to fight all the time. And if you're not fighting, you're not grinding, and you're not hustling, and you're not, working super hard all the time, you're not going to survive. And there is an element of that. I mean, there's tons of hard work that goes into it. But as the company grows and the team expands, Shopify is now more than 10,000 people. I needed to change the way that I communicated. I needed to change the way that I provided a vision or direction. And the cool part is, the more you see it work, the more you realize, hey, this is a new tactic for me. This is a new tool I'm going to use in my tool belt. And I think that is all about empathy, which is like, okay, you think you're being clear. What does the other person think? If they don't think you're clear, then it doesn't matter what you think. And so over time, it's not that I became an empathetic person. Generally, my wife would say that I still lack empathy in many situations, but I recognize that I can get more by simply trying to understand how the other person is receiving it. And so it's just a better way to do business.
I totally get you. I do have to ask you, in terms of the empathy there and the communication with the team, one thing that I find, man, you have thousands, I have, tens, but not everything's going great all the time. And I spend so much time, Wolf of Wall Street chest pumping, going, we're going to change the world. And sometimes it's not, and it's just not happening. And my question to you is, can you be vulnerable? Because I know we speak about the power of vulnerability and all that, which is true, but it's hard and you don't want to demotivate the team. Can you be vulnerable today? And if so, how can you? And I guess you're kind of advising me here, because I don't want to lose the morale. I don't want to lose the excitement. How do I do it?
Let me give you one great example that really worked well for me. I've had anxiety for the majority of my life. It was undiagnosed. I didn't know what it was, but there was always this thing that I felt deep in my stomach or my gut or my heart, whatever it was. And it manifested itself in a lot of different ways over the years. But eventually, I wanted to understand more I wanted to be more self-aware. I wanted to be more self-introspective about what drives me, what are things I need to work on. And so I began to see a psychologist, and I've been seeing a coach for a while. And eventually it became obvious that but this thing that I have that I'm describing to all these people, it's anxiety. And so the cool part about knowing that is now I have all this, now I have a terminology for it. Now I have nomenclature that I can say, like, I can go read books about anxiety. I can talk to other people that have come out publicly that said that anxiety. So one, getting that language is really valuable. And then the second thing that I did was I began to talk about, both internally at Shopify, but also externally, that I have anxiety. And the most remarkable thing happened. All these other people who I deeply respect, who I admire and look up to, they came to me and said, "Hey, I also have anxiety. Here are some of the tools that I have to that I've used, whether it was mindfulness practice, or it was walks with the dog, or it was books to read or podcasts to read, or taking a 10-minute music break in the middle of my day." All of these things actually made a huge difference. So one, I now was able to manage my anxiety better because now I have a term for it. There's nomenclature. Second, I was on the receiving end of all this amazing advice from all these wonderful people about how they do it on their own. But the third thing, which was sort of this incredible bonus that came from it, is I started hearing from people that I seemed far more approachable. That even though, I don't really bang my chest, but I spent a lot of time, trying to motivate and get people excited about Shopify's mission, which is not a very difficult mission to get excited by. I mean, we're trying to become the entrepreneurship company. If you believe in that, you're going to be excited by that. But it made me far more approachable. It made me more human. And what I've actually come to realize is that in the right circumstances, with the right, sequence of words, and true, I'm not talking about false modesty or false authenticity, but true authenticity. Vulnerability actually can come off as an incredible strength, not a weakness. In fact, the opposite could be true. Bravado, particularly false bravado, where people do see, there's no way Harley is always this motivated, always this ambitious, always this strong. That actually comes off as inauthentic, and therefore, this when you're always banging your chest and you're always kind of doing the the Wolf of Wall Street thing, there is always this filter that goes on everything you talk about, which effectively makes you 10 or 15 or 20% less effective because they put on the Wolf of Wall Street filter and they're like, yeah, we know. Whereas by being more vulnerable, which means you're being more authentic, I find that people listen to you in a different way, and I think it's a wonderful way to live just as a human being, but it also it brings your team closer to you. It creates a lot more connection with the people you're talking to.
You mentioned the anxiety there, and I didn't actually know that. I never like to, I'm always very cautious about the words that people use, especially kind of medically, but I get very anxious today and feel often very insecure, bluntly, manage $250 million, which is a joke considering when we were 5 years ago, I had about 50 quid to my name.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm always terrified that I'm going to be Macaulay Culkin, the kid from Home Alone, where everyone's like, "Oh, where is he now?" And you're like, "Oof, don't know." My point being, that's my big insecurity and fear. When you look today, man, respectfully, Shopify is a vast company, and you're the president. What insecurities do you have today? And I guess, when you sit on your own in the armchair, what are you like? Oh, I'm really insecure about this.
I read this thing a couple days ago, which I loved. I'm going to try to pull it up here for a second because I want to get it exactly right. It goes like this. The most important law of ecology is this. So I think there's 4 laws of ecology, and this writer says this is the most important law. For an organism to survive, the rate of learning must be equal to or greater than the rate of change happening around them. With the rate of change escalating, we must learn faster, learn better, and learn more. I think a lot about that. That's a better way to put it. That's a better sequence of words than I've ever used, which is why I want to quote that directly. But that's what I'm insecure about. I'm insecure about the fact that Shopify has, I think, one of the most incredible opportunities of any company that's ever been built to truly change the way entrepreneurship, business, independence, success is created. And again, not everyone is going to want to take their company public, Figs or Allbirds on Shopify. Some, set up stores on Shopify and businesses simply because they want to put food on their table, like my grandfather, or they want to afford, ballet lessons or hockey lessons, or whatever it might be. But I think the opportunity that Shopify has is so unique There's never been a company, I think, and I try to study this, that has the chance to be the world's entrepreneurship company, to create a real movement to encourage more people to do this thing that we call business creation. And I think business creation is important because I think it's not a perfect meritocracy, but it's the closest thing we as humans have to a meritocracy, where it doesn't matter what your last name is or how much money you have. What matters is, have you created something of value that someone else wants? And then we make it really easy. So when I think about the opportunity that Shopify has, and I think about my role here, what makes me insecure is I need to grow faster than Shopify. I mean, Shopify is growing really, really fast. I mean, 10% of all e-commerce in the United States is done via Shopify. Every 28 seconds, a new entrepreneur gets their first sale on Shopify. These are incredible numbers. And so now in that case, that insecurity actually drives me. So that's sort of where I think there's some nuance with this whole term of anxiety. And it goes back to the resistant versus resilient. I actually think you having anxiety about the fact that $250 million of other people's money is being entrusted to you is probably incredibly motivating. And that's where we get into this difference between, eustress and de-stress. De-stress or distress can paralyze you. Eustress can be incredibly motivating. And I think that's sort of where the more you talk about these things, the more you have a good sense of mental health and what this is, how I'm feeling right now, the more you can hone it and turn that vulnerability into, I hate to use such a cheesy term, but into a superpower. I actually think because I worry about Shopify growing so fast and my need to keep up, it is the greatest motivator for me learning, growing, adopting new habits, new tactics, and trying to have a great network of people that I can learn from. And I think in that way, it can be really valuable. And that again goes back to why it's important to talk about these things, because all these new tools that I have around managing anxiety that have helped me continue to grow at the same pace or faster than Shopify, I wouldn't have had half those tools if I wouldn't be talking about this stuff.
Can I ask, what's the difference between eustress and de-stress first?
Well, so my wife's a psychotherapist, so I get all these sort of psychotherapist terms thrown at me on a daily basis. But one is just it's simply two different reactions to stress, and one is paralyzing and debilitating, and the other one is action oriented and actually fairly motivating. Actually, I didn't want to use the term motivation, but it motivates. My stress, and I think your stress to some extent, can be incredibly motivating if we hone it. Whereas other people's stress, when it's not managed properly, can be, paralyzing.
You mentioned they're kind of growing at the same rate that Shopify does. That's really fucking hard. Yeah. My question to you is, what does your coach say? And how do you approach that then? Because it is such a challenging thing to grapple with. How do you actually approach that? And what does your coach and support system say to help you think through that?
I heard this thing that entrepreneurship is a personal growth journey disguised as a business. That's kind of what Shopify is for me. Shopify for me is this incredible company that also allows me to grow at this rate. Look, I think part of that journey, I've been at Shopify now, it's like my Shopify bar mitzvah. I've been at Shopify now for 13 years. I'm 38 years old, so about a third of my life has been spent at this company, and I don't take that for granted. I'm truly, I feel really, really grateful for that. But part of it is not necessarily doing everything, and part of it is knowing what I'm really, really good at and honing that skill. And I think actually this is where a lot of larger companies get this wrong. I think Tobi uses this great analogy of like a river stone. You take this like beautiful spiky stone, and if you put it in the river over years and decades and hundreds of years, it becomes this kind of smooth and evenly, non-spiky river stone. We don't want to create river stones at Shopify. I don't want to be a river stone. I want to be spiky in certain areas. But in order to be spiky in certain areas, that means that I'm not necessarily going to be great at everything. And so having that that awareness to say, look, this is not like, I'm not a details person. I don't go into like, I'm not in this. There are some leaders who they are spreadsheet leaders. They live in spreadsheets. I am not. I'm a storyteller. I like, and the greatest story I believe that I could ever tell is that of Shopify, which is that of entrepreneurship, which is that of Harley and my family. And it's just, I'm lucky that the Venn diagram of my personal life and my professional life overlaps so meaningfully. But I'm never going to be the best, operations manager. Therefore, the people that I surround myself with need to be really, really good at that. And so that is also something really difficult, I think, to a lot of us that are entrepreneurs, because in the early stages of company building, you have to be the CEO and the janitor and the receptionist and the head of sales and the head of production and the head of support. You just don't have anyone else to do it. So you end up accidentally being kind of everything to everyone. But over time, if you care about scaling the business, you got to get really clear on like what, where you're going to spend your time. And I want to be world class at helping the world know about Shopify. I want anyone who's thinking about a business in the shower in the morning, or anyone that has a hobby and they have some inclination to commercialize that hobby, to know that Shopify is the entrepreneurship company. And that's my life's work. And so anything that doesn't help with that, I can't just say it doesn't matter. I have a responsibility to supplement that with people that do care about it.
Man, I have a bold statement here, but one that I worry about, and it worries me when I meet founders. I think we've lost the art of storytelling. I think a lot of founders today, 99%, cannot tell a brilliant narrative, cannot really entice people along their journey. Bluntly, I think in the way that me and you can. And I think it's maybe, I don't know if it's the proliferation of capital that means they don't need to, whatever it is. Do you agree with the lost art of storytelling? And I guess, what do you think... And I can answer this because I have thoughts on it, but makes a great story.
I think what you're talking about is actually, I would replace the term story with mission. I think that a lot of founders, like you, I'm very lucky to invest in a bunch of different startups. And obviously, the obvious things are you look for grit, you look for vision, you look for, someone who's just going to grind and someone who is so deeply passionate about solving a problem. But I think the companies that I think have done really well is they have a deep understanding of what their mission is. And you can call it story, but I think the two are pretty much the same. From a very early stage, Zuck and Facebook or Meta, they were very clear on what their mission was. You may not agree with it, but their mission was to connect the world. And Google had a very clear mission. It was to organize the world's information. I mean, later on it was do no evil or whatever it was, but initially it was very obvious what the purpose of Google was. And I think if you look at these iconic companies, you have those. So I don't think there is a way to build a 100-year business, which is what we're trying to do. We're 15 years in now. Or to have a company that fundamentally changes the way things are done if you don't have a very clear mission. And the way that the mission is articulated to the world is through storytelling. And so I don't know if it's a lost art or people simply just don't necessarily need it the same way at the early stages as they do at sort of later stages. But I think maybe this is in our first episode from 5 years ago. One of the first things I did when I got to Shopify was I told Tobi that I was going to put signage all over our building that said Shopify. And he said, why? Because there was no signage. It was just a building and didn't say Shopify. And I was like, because I want the world to know that this is where entrepreneurship is being developed. And I want the world to know this is where Shopify is. And I want people walking on the streets to see Shopify and wonder what that is. And then eventually connect the dots that this is the entrepreneurship company. So I at any stage, I think it's important, but I don't think, there was an article that is now fairly well known in October, November in the Wall Street Journal, I think, or Washington Post about the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
It's this interesting article because, it talked about most people or how many people have left their jobs. But, what is now pretty well known is they didn't leave the workforce. They left jobs they didn't like. And at the same time, I think the numbers were 4.6 million new business registrations happened in 2021 alone in the United States, this massive jump from a decade earlier. So I think in many ways, not only do companies need to be good storytellers, particularly about their mission, but I think if they want to recruit, they have to be super clear about, hey, the reason to work here is not because of the stock options, not just because of the comp, not just because the work is interesting and you can have a big impact, but also because do you have a connection to what we stand for? And the people that work at Shopify, all 10,000 more, I think have a deep connection to entrepreneurship to some extent.
I totally get you there. I love that in terms of the billboards. For me, it's like, you could say I started, the podcast from the bedroom of my family home and I interviewed a VC. Or you could say, I remember being super nervous. I asked my mother to unplug the home phones in case someone rang. I only had $50 in my bank account. And then I started with Guy Kawasaki. I was super, super nervous. And so I had a chamomile tea beside me. And you bring in the essence that make it so much more familiar for people. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the craft of storytelling. And I think the craft of storytelling is incredibly important. I mean, you run a very successful podcast. You sort of, by very nature, have to be a great storyteller. The relationship that I have with Tobi is effectively that and the same. I mean, Tobi, I think, is probably the greatest product mind on the planet. I mean, I don't say that boastfully. I say that from with great insight and great experience working side by side with him for, a third of my life. My job is then to take what he builds and ensure the world knows about it. And the only way the world's gonna actually care about it is if I leave these breadcrumbs of storytelling and narrative. And if anyone follows me on social media, I talk about Shopify's product a bit, but what I really talk about is our merchant story. Because for me, the way to deeply understand Shopify is to look at Ben Francis in 2013 as a pizza delivery boy in London in college, who decides to start Gymshark, and to watch his journey to be one of the most important athletic brands on the planet in 2022. That and the way to do it is not to just talk about his numbers, but I start with what he was doing before. I begin to talk about why he didn't think that the existing athletic companies and the existing brands out there, it was either for runners or it was for gym rats, but there wasn't anything in between that. And so he felt that he can build a brand for that particular niche that he himself was. And so I actually think it's important to become good storytellers. But again, going back to the whole, knowing what you're good at, you don't have to be a great storyteller when you're getting started. But at some point, you're going to need to find somebody who is not like you. If let's say you're a great engineer or a great product designer, you're going to have to find someone who is really good at that craft. And that actually is another sort of subtle point, I think, that a lot of people start businesses with people that are just like them, people that they would be friends in high school with. But if you look at some of the best teams out there that have built incredible companies, they are really different. I mean, their Venn diagrams in terms of skill sets don't really overlap. Rather, they extend the aggregate skill set of the entire leadership team. And I think Tobi has done a really good job of surrounding himself with people at Shopify who are not like him, which means that what you end up with is an aggregate skill set that covers all the important things you need, whether it's product or engineering or scalability, or it's, operational excellence, or it's storytelling and commercialization.
Can I ask one that I find so interesting? And it's, when you look at the relationship that you and Tobi have, across the board, everyone says it's fantastic, it's wonderful, it's my favorite word, wholesome. But my question to you, and it's always very interesting, can you take me to your last disagreement or a disagreement that you can remember, and how you approach conflict resolution as a professional marriage?
Yeah. We are not the same. Him and I are very, very different. I think that the key for us has been, at certain times there needs to be a, disagree but commit. But there's always debate. And I think part of, you've heard us talk about the trust battery. I think the trust battery is a metaphor that still is misunderstood. Everyone that comes to Shopify starts at a 50% trust battery. And the key is to get your trust battery as high as possible, because at that point, that's when debate, that's when disagreement becomes far richer. Because now you're not challenging each other's individual, minds. You're not challenging each other, on a personal level. You're actually just challenging ideas. Your trust battery is at a requisite or a sufficient, benchmark that you actually can go deep on a topic and it doesn't feel personal. And that, I think, has been the key for Tobi and I. Frankly, the key to most great partnerships has been this deep mutual respect. And I think part of it is there's a default. There are certain times where he'll default to what I think because it's my craft. It's the thing that I've studied more than he has. And the opposite is true when it comes to product or technology. I think that's a major part of it. And the other part of it is like something that is not talked about, and you use the term wholesome, but it's fun. We enjoy working together. I know that there is this, I don't know, maybe this is like gets controversial a bit, but like, I don't think fun is talked about enough. Like when you are doing this for a long time, a third of your life, and hopefully it'll be, half of my life by the time I'm done at Shopify. If it's not fun, it's not going to be a great journey. You're not going to get as much joy out of it. You're not going to get as much personal growth out of it. It's always going to feel like a grind. And sometimes it is a grind. It's okay for it to be a grind. You can have a bad day or a bad week. You can even have a bad month. But over the long term, you have to have fun with the people you want to work with. And you're not going to read that in a business book. And there's probably not going to be many podcasts that talk about that element. But that is the X factor to great partnership, is that you actually have fun even in the heat of a very, in the heat of a disagreement. And I think we have fun with each other.
You say there about having fun in the partnership with Tobi, and we said about wholesome, obviously we're friends on different social networks. You have the most wonderful, loving relationship with your wife.
Oh, thank you.
Talk to me about what makes a truly successful marriage, and advise me, because I want a similar one.
So just what I put out on social media is, I hope is a reflection of my loving marriage. But I will say this because I know other people who I have an intimate understanding of their marriage, who on social media, they look like they have the greatest marriage, and I'm not sure they do. So just as a sort of warning to everyone listening that, everyone's putting up their highlight reels on their blooper reels, which I think is well known. I wanted to say that out loud. I don't think I started out as a good husband. I don't think I sort of knew how to be a good husband. One thing that was helpful to me was, in the same way that, pre-IPO, through people like Jeremy at Bessemer and Amish at Firstmark, I started asking around, who are some of the best public company leaders out there? And Jeremy and Amish and all these great people in my life would say, talk to this person, talk to that person. They've done a good job here. They've done a good job here. And I sort of pick and choose certain attributes or character traits or tactics that each of those people use. And then I sort of build my own version of that. I did the same thing with getting married. Lindsay and I got married in 2013, and we'd been dating for four or 5 years previously. But over time, I sort of began to see other couples, and some I was like, I don't know. So there seems like there's a lot of issue there, and others be like, I don't understand. Like those people always seem like they have this great relationship, this great, yin and yang sort of dynamic. And first of all, I needed to figure out if that was true or that was just, again, like the social media version of the relationship. And then once I was able to ascertain that, yeah, actually these two have been through a lot together, and yet they're so close, they're so committed, they really are like, they're teammates. I would call them and say, look, I know this is kind of a weird piece of advice to give, but I'd like to be a good husband, and I'd like to know what that means. And I'd like to understand, what are some of the pitfalls that I could make. And, part of what, Lindsay and I think have been able to develop together, is one, similar to me and Tobi, we have a lot of fun together, but two, it is Harley and Lindsay versus the world. We are a team. And sometimes like I'm on team Lindsay because she's going through something. And sometimes she's on team Harley because I need something. And that ability to switch roles and not necessarily be, it's with the Shopify kind of, brand and where Shopify is in the world, it's very easy that everywhere we go, it becomes the Harley show or the Shopify show. And I don't want that. Lindsay's a great entrepreneur. She's a great psychotherapist. She's incredible in terms of, the way she looks at philanthropy and community contribution. And so there's sort of, I know when I am her date, and she knows when she's my date, and we're okay with that dynamic. The second thing is, I'll just say it because I think it's helpful. We've been seeing a couples counselor almost since like day one. We've been going to couples therapy. And we initially did it because on the advice of someone, that one of these mentors that I think has a great relationship, who only started seeing a couples counselor years after they got married, after they had a traumatic experience. They started seeing a couples counselor, and they're like, hey, this has been an amazing thing. And so Lindsay and I adopted it fairly early on in our marriage. And the way we sort of looked at it was, in the same way that it is always easier to start going to the gym and seeing a trainer before you sort of need to, and when you're still kind of in good shape, as opposed to waiting till you're totally out of shape and it's really, really difficult to get into shape at that point. That's kind of the way we looked at couples therapy. And we still see a couples therapist every 2 weeks. Sometimes it's, a session about how well things are going. And other times it's the couples therapy is a forcing function for us just to say the thing. Just to be super candid and honest with, hey, here's how we're feeling right now. Here's where Harley is not being supportive. One obvious, one thing that comes up a lot is Lindsay has an issue with something and Harley's solution is to solve the issue, or Harley's reaction is to solve the issue. And so that I don't know why. That's how I reacted to Lindsay's problem. I sort of, like an entrepreneur, just being Harley, like that's how I did it. I'd hear about a problem. Something happened with, one of our kids' schools, and I'd say, okay, here's what we're going to do. And she's like, I'm already solving it. I don't need you to solve the problem. I just need you to hear what I'm saying and tell me that sucks. And I have a really tough time saying that sucks because that's just not how I'm built. I'm built for solution. And so now what I do is, again, very simple tactic. She comes to me with a problem and I say, do you want me to be, just to be listen? Do you want me to listen? Is it just me listening? Or do you want me to help solve the problem? And 9 times out of 10, she's like, I just want you to listen. And I'm like, great. I'm able to switch on my prefrontal cortex and quiet down my amygdala, my lizard brain. And now I just listen. And at the end, sympathetically and empathetically, I say, that sucks. And I believe, I try to be honest about that. And other times she's like, can you help me solve it? I'm like, yes, I can. Give me the problem. We're going to solve it together. That small, those 2 lines, do you want me just to listen or do you want me to help you solve it? I think has increased our dynamic in our marriage and frankly, like the romance and love of our relationship probably tenfold. And I'm not sure I would have ever had that had I not gone to couples therapy and spoken to people that have great relationships.
I think one of the biggest fallacy of relationships was we're inherently expected to know how the other person feels. And I think you're absolutely right. Ask, what do you want from me in this moment? And then I will provide it. And most often, as you said, it's just someone being listened to and being heard. We chatted before, very lucky to have a new wonderful girlfriend, but I worry about reverting to this mean state of mediocrity. You said there about being Team Lindsay and being Team Harley. Bluntly, I think the best entrepreneurs are really selfish. And I have been really selfish over my life because I haven't had anyone else. And now I'm worried that I will have to be less selfish because I've got Team Paola as well. So how should I think about reverting to the mean in that concern?
You want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together. And I think, I want to go far in my relationship. I believe that part of my ability to operate at this, I don't know, the beats per minute of my life is very high. With Shopify, with my personal life, I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. Zoe is 2 and Bailey is 5 years old. The only way I can do this is if I have a really strong foundation. And that strong foundation comes from my family. It comes from my marriage to Lindsay. It comes from my relationship to like my closest friends, my dynamic with my colleagues and Tobi. And so I guard for that. And I think you need to decide, everyone needs to decide whether or not they want to run their marriage like they run their business. And I'm not sure that's always the same thing. I do think actually there are a lot of similarities to it. We talked about empathy earlier, or authenticity, or vulnerability. I mean, there's some things that are just universal things that I think humans need to adopt because I think you get better results with it. But I think, like, let's say you do, Lindsay and I have a ritual. We have date night, and date night has become a little bit strange during COVID, but we've now resumed date night. And sometimes the date night is like, I plan the whole thing and I'm a planner. So I think about like, not only what restaurant we're going to, but I think about, this is going to sound weird, but I know the table number of the table that I love at all my favorite restaurants. And I know the chefs at those restaurants too, because I go there a lot. And so I'll text the chef and say, hey, I know this is not on the menu, but it's a special night for me. It's date night. I'd love to have this. And I'm, how you do anything is how you do everything, I think, to some extent. And so I just like, that's how I do it. And then other weeks, I'm like, Lynn's like, it's your night. And she may plan something totally different, and I just go along with it. And I got to tell you, sometimes I don't love going along with it. Sometimes when Lindsay says we're going to this restaurant, I think to myself, like, did she pick the table that I like at that restaurant or not? And over time, this is going to sound, it sounds super weird and OCD or type A, but it is more important that Lindsay feels that she is in control of that particular date night because it's hers, than whether or not I'm sitting at the right table. And over time, practicing that, like any other skill set, it gets easier.
Can I ask, you mentioned very openly, not being a great husband in the early days. Do you think you've always been a great father? It's so hard. You're president of Shopify. There's 10,000 employees. Have you always been a great father? And have you had some lessons on what great fatherhood means to you?
No, I have not. I'll give you the best example. I thought being a great father, here's a perfect example of that. I thought being a great father was on Saturday mornings when my kids wanted pancakes, or what Bailey calls brunch. She says, I want brunch this morning, which she means is pancakes and bacon and that sort of thing. Making the best pancakes and having the best bacon, and setting the table really beautifully, that made me a great father. First of all, if any of you listening have small kids, they don't give a shit about that. They don't care about how nice the table's set. What actually my kids valued more was my presence. Was I actually there, and was I mindful of them? In the early days, so I'd make these great, brunch breakfasts, and I'd set up this nice table, and I'd get fresh squeezed orange juice and make these great pancakes. I'd watch YouTube videos we have a flat top in our kitchen, which is a really cool thing to have. And I'd watch YouTube videos on how to make the best pancakes and all this stuff, and I'd present it. And then I'd be there, but I'd also be like checking an email, or I'd get a phone call. And it was during one of these couple sessions with Lindsay that the couples therapist said, well, Harley, are you a present father these days? And I said, yeah, I gave all these examples. And the therapist and Lindsay both said, that is not what she's talking about. The kids don't value some special pancake mix or some special bacon. The kids value, do they have your entire attention? And that hit me right over the head, because it frightened me that if I don't make some changes, that I'm going to kind of be that dad. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be the dad who superficially is a good dad, but authentically is not, practically is not. And so those are some of the changes that I had to make. But by the way, that's another example of why having a venue, like, I'm not sure Lindsay and I would have ever had a conversation one-on-one. Hey, Lindsay, am I a good dad? I don't think she'd ever come to me and say, hey, you're not a good dad. But having a couples therapist say, do you think you're a good dad right these days? Or are you a present father? Which is something that I wouldn't have said. That all of a sudden created this conversation that created space for Lindsay to say, you're not doing it the way you think you are.
Final one, and then we'll do a quick fire. But what changes have you actually made to be that present, loving, real father that you wanted, not just the superficial?
A couple of easy things were, I like to work out every day, but I'd kind of work out whenever I finished work. And so, I'd be here I'm in my home office here. I'd be here, and then, 6 o'clock or 6:30 or something, 7:15, I'd go to the gym, work out for 45 minutes, and then go up to dinner. And I'd almost always miss the kids. Zoe would be sleeping by then, or Bailey would be in bed by then. And I couldn't figure out how to do this, because it was important for me to work really hard. Finish my day, finish the work. It was important for me to get some exercise in, because I just feel better when I work out. And it was important for me to see my kids. And I felt like I had to choose. And so what I did was, instead, I hired a trainer. Initially it was virtually, now it's in person, who every day at 5:30 would show up at the house. And I recognize that not everyone, I wasn't able to afford that, frankly, up until very recently. But, a lot of us have Pelotons. My suspicion is most of us do the on-demand classes, not the scheduled classes. But actually, if you have to do the scheduled classes because you have to show up at 4:30 or 5:30, it means that is blocking it off. And so now I finish my day by 5:30, because that's when the trainer shows up, or yoga teacher. I do 45 minutes to an hour. After that, I'm able actually to be I'm able to see my kids, put them to sleep, and then after late at night, I may come back to the office and do another hour of work if I need to. So there are these sort of really good concrete, almost like bookends of my day now that are immovable. Because someone is showing up at my door at 5:30, that's when I have to work out. And there are times where like there's something so urgent happening at the office, at the company, where I'm like, hey, I can't work out today. Like, so I know you're here. Like if you don't mind, like we'll find some time, but I'm going to be 20 minutes late. But more times than not, that has been a really important tactic. The second thing is weekends. I really try to do activities with the kids on weekends. So right now, Bailey, who's 5, is becoming a great skier. So I'm skiing with her a lot. Zoe is 2. I'm trying to get her on skis. Last weekend was the first time. This weekend will be the second time. But having these projects we work on together where they have my full attention, I have their full attention, that has been amazing. And so rather than just kind of like again, scheduling is really important. So I will schedule all these things. I will put in my calendar like a 2-hour block to ski with Bailey. Some people listening are going to think that's totally ridiculous, but that helps me be more of an attentive and a mindful and a fully present father.
No, I totally get it. I love that. The only challenge is I got told that calendar invites were unromantic. So
they are unromantic, but you know what's even worse? Like nothing. That's way worse. And so, pick your poison. And Lindsay also doesn't like the calendar invite. She's like, you are completely flooding my weekend with calendar invites. Like, do we really need a calendar invite for like, go for a walk? And I'm like, I kind of do need that. And if you're able to be okay with a very unromantic calendar invite to go for a walk, it means that like, I can be there for you in a way that I probably couldn't if our weekends were just kind of like, let's just see where it goes and kind of go with the flow. I'm not a go with the flow guy, and I embrace that, and that's okay. But I also want to be a good husband and a good dad.
Man, I so love this discussion. We're going to do a quick.
This is totally not what I thought we were going to talk about, but hopefully this is interesting.
Neither me, but this is why I love the show. But I'm going to say a short statement. You're going to give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great, yeah.
So, what's the favorite book and why?
The book that I'm reading right now, actually, which is I'm just highlighting it, is this book called Ishigo Ishi, which is basically making the most of every moment. Do you know Ikigai? Do you know that concept?
Yeah.
So Ikigai is well known, but there's actually a second book after Ikigai. Just for those that are listening, is the Venn diagram overlap of like what you love doing, what the world will value, what you can get paid for, and one other thing, something that like that gives you gives you great joy. Maybe I already said that, but it's basically finding your life's work. But there's a second book called Ishigo Ishi, which is effectively making the most of every moment. I'm not necessarily recommending that book. What I am recommending is for those of you that are listening that are entrepreneurs or running businesses, or you're kind of, hard driving type A's, I actually think there's a lot of value of not reading more business books. I've read a lot. Every now and then I'll pick up a new one that I think is really interesting. I still think High Output Management by Andy Grove is still the best book that I've ever read on business. But I'm not reading business books right now. Even podcasts. I'm trying to listen to right now, How to Take Over the World, which is a history podcast, or All Songs Considered, which is a music podcast. I find listening or reading about things that are completely outside my day-to-day is so incredibly interesting. And I love, even though I can't understand everything that Rick Rubin is talking about when he talks about music production, I love hearing someone that goes so deep in a topic that I know nothing about.
Harley, since we stopped talking about business as much and we started talking about what makes great marriage, what makes great fatherhood, shows numbers through the roof. And actually,
seriously?
It's all applied to, totally true. It's like doubled, trebled. Wow. And it's applicable to management. People want people. So I totally agree. What's the hardest element of your role with Shopify today?
Keeping up. Shopify grows so quickly. Can I learn at an equal or greater pace of Shopify? And I only say that because I think, it's great that Shopify has 2 million stores. I think we want to turn more people into entrepreneurs, and that's a massive, massive mission and responsibility. And what keeps me up is can I keep growing at this pace? And I think I can, but it's not, it's very difficult.
Which leader do you look up to and why?
It's so interesting. The obvious names that come up are sort of all these like tech visionaries and stuff like that, but I'm not really sure. There's a guy named John Hope Bryant that I recently met. He runs Operation Hope. I think he's one of the best leaders I've ever encountered. I actually joined his board recently, and he's in Atlanta. His goal is to create 1 million, an additional 1 million Black entrepreneurs in the next decade or so. I think he's just absolutely incredible. And the way that he thinks about everything from civil rights to economic independence is amazing. And what he does is, as he goes on his journey, he just brings all these other people along in the journey and finds a way to speak to them in a way that is so compelling. Even if they're not interested in everything he's interested in, he gets so many people on the boat with him in a way that I've never seen before. And you can look up John Hope Bryant. He's amazing.
You mentioned joining his board. What have you learned from a board member that you've worked with, and why did that stick with you?
There's some like tactical stuff, Gail Goodman, who's on our board. She's an amazing entrepreneur. She ran Constant Contact for a very long time. We'll talk about reorgs, and she'll say things like, the best part of a reorg is not the final destination, but the actual activity of reorging. Like companies that get really good at reorging, are just more anti-fragile companies. So there's always practical stuff like that. You mentioned Jeremy Levine earlier. Jeremy Levine is probably is one of the people I've learned the most from. One of the things that Jeremy does that I don't do very well is in board meetings, Jeremy will listen. So he'll be silent, he'll sit there and he'll listen, and he'll wait till the end of hearing everyone's input, and then he'll comment on it. That ability to sit there and just shut your mouth and not say anything while you're acquiring more insight and information, and then turn that into something turn that into a better response or a better piece of insight. I don't think anyone does it better than Jeremy Levine. His ability to digest information and then process it is unlike anything I've ever seen.
Penultimate one. What 3 traits would you most like your children to adopt?
I know this sort of is a weird term, but I want them to be passionate about something. I don't care what it is, but I want them to be really, really into something. And that may be entrepreneurship, it may be art, it may be charity, it may be education. I want them to be really deeply interested in something. That's the first thing. The second thing is I want them to be kind. I'm sort of learning kindness as I go. I think kindness is something that actually pays incredible dividends, and most people don't sort of think about kindness as a great trait, and I think it's important. And probably the third is I want them to be ambitious. I mentioned the pancake thing earlier. I think being ambitious is important, but I want them to be ambitious about the right things. I want them to be ambitious about enjoying breakfast or brunch with their own kids one day, as opposed to being ambitious about tweaking the pancakes, making sure the pancake batter is perfect. Those would kind of be the 3 off the top of my head.
We last spoke 5 years ago on the show. If we speak in 5 years' time, where do you want to be, and what does success in those next 5 years look like?
I mean, I always sort of use, my life's work as sort of as the context for that. And I want more people to try their hand in entrepreneurship. I want to change the way that people consider entrepreneurship. I think there's still too many people that find that to be inaccessible. They think it's too expensive or it's too complicated. And I think that entrepreneurship is not only the great way to self-actualize, but I think for so many of us, it's the best way to find our ikigai. It's the best way to find our life's work. It's the best way to take what we already love. Let's say you make jewelry at your kitchen table and you think there's no way anyone may want this. I bet you there is. I think there is people that will want your jewelry. And so that's part of it on the professional side. And on the personal side, I want to keep, I want to continue to grow my own understanding of who I am and how the world operates. I want to continue to be a great husband and great father. And hopefully inspire others to kind of find their own journey, whatever that might be, and to do it with great enthusiasm. I am incredibly optimistic, not just about my own life and about Shopify. I'm optimistic about the world. I think that we live in some of the most interesting times ever. And I recognize there's still a lot of things that are not perfect, but I'm incredibly optimistic about the next 5 years, not just for Shopify or the economy or entrepreneurship, but just kind of where we are all going as humans.
Harley, I love doing the show, but it's not always roses and fun, actually. And then you have shows like this where you have such great discussions, and it really like lights the fire inside me of why I love doing this so much.
Oh, it means so much to me.
I can't thank you enough for joining me, man. So honestly, I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Harry. It's an honor to be on, and hopefully you'll invite me on maybe less than 5 years, maybe 2.5 years next time. But thank you for inviting me on. It's a pleasure.